when they are basically meaningless, worthless. My best guess at present is a combination of drugs and computer games.
The doctor's investigations come as Kyoto University professor Dr. Masanori Tokushima slammed Japan's Ministry of Health for refusing to halt its COVID vaccination program, citing data showing a number of adverse reactions and deaths stemming from jab.
So I am telling you, you got to conduct an investigation. No doctor can make a medical diagnosis simply by looking at such a piece of paper. I'm saying that you must look at the medical reports and do a proper investigation. There's no question about it. Stop the bad science and do the right science. That's enough. Looks like you're trying to destroy evidence. Do the right thing, or you're just going to have a criminal lawsuit. Enough is enough. I don't care what you say. No one is going to be convinced by the process or bullshit things that you are talking about.
Well, of course, we will not only evaluate the results as they are. We are trying.
You can't possibly have any way to evaluate it. What you need, clinically speaking, is that you need to look at the medical records properly, look at the data, and do it properly and carefully, one case at a time. People's lives are at stake.
Yes, sir, we will make every effort to do so.
You idiot. Enough is enough. You have so many people here, but you are not getting anywhere. Lawmakers also came all the way here. You can't repeat this kind of thing.
One second, everybody. Having a bit of a audio issue here. I'm going to restart the countdown in 1 sec.
Oh no. It's all falling apart.
Yeah, it's going to be one of those nights. Well, basically the entire internet was down today.
Yeah.
Find out what's up in a second. There we go. I found the problem. All right, restarting countdown.
And how will they find some sense of meaning in life when they are basically meaningless, worthless? My best guess at present is a combination of drugs and computer games.
The doctor's investigations come as Kyoto University professor Dr. Masanori Tokushima slammed Japan's Ministry of Health for refusing to halt its COVID vaccination program, citing data showing a number of adverse reactions and deaths stemming from jab.
So I am telling you, you got to conduct an investigation. No doctor can make a medical diagnosis simply by looking at such a piece of paper. I'm saying that you must look at the medical reports and do a proper investigation. There's no question about it. Stop the bad science and do the right science. That's enough. Looks like you're trying to destroy evidence. Do the right thing, or you're just going to have a criminal lawsuit. Enough is enough. I don't care what you say. No one is going to be convinced by the process or bullshit things that you are talking about.
Well, of course, we will not only evaluate the results as they are. We are trying.
You can't possibly have any way to evaluate it. What you need, clinically speaking, is that you need to look at the medical records properly, look at the data, and do it properly and carefully, one case at a time. People's lives are at stake.
Yes, sir, we will make every effort to do so.
You idiot. Enough is enough. You have so many people here, but you are not getting anywhere. Lawmakers also came all the way here. You can't repeat this kind of thing.
I don't know if it's far-fetched to ask, but Russian actor could be continuing to fuel things as this protest grows, but perhaps even instigating it from the outset.
Although it may take several decades for the process of transformation to unfold, combat will likely take place in new dimensions, in space, cyberspace, and perhaps the world of microbes. Space itself will become a theater of war as nations gain access to space capabilities and come to rely on them. Further, the distinction between military and commercial space systems, combatants and non-combatants, will become blurred. Information systems will become an important focus of attack, particularly for U.S. enemies seeking to short-circuit sophisticated American forces, and advanced forms of biological warfare that can target specific genotypes may transform biological warfare from the realm of terror to a politically useful tool.
Let's get ready to spread 'em. Yo!
Ooh.
That happened last time. I think I screwed up that intro. It ends a little bit early.
Oh, that's okay.
Cuts me off.
Cuts
Like,
you off.
what's the point?
I know you need to cut me off.
Yeah, exactly. You've had enough, sir.
Out.
You've had enough.
Just do it.
Just spread it.
Just spread it.
Hello, universe. How are you? Moniker, SuperSpreaders Unite. Okay.
Yep.
Goofy
Try
Rupee
it.
boys. Yes, Goofy Rupee. Our connection to East Coast Canadian.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm going to figure out a way to do some kind of show with them. Going to hit it like a Canadian angle.
Yeah, something at some point. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're cool.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Moniker, any thought on the Nord Stream expose published today? And, yeah. America did it. That's about my thoughts on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Interesting day. We just recovered from Twitter almost in its entirety being offline for a while. You couldn't message or follow anybody. The spaces seemed to be working. Facebook and like all the major data centers were down. San Francisco, Chicago, all this stuff, and it was hitting everybody. So, boy, you should hear the theories going around. Woo! Chinese balloon, too. And it hit right when they're actually in Congress grilling the Twitter executives about their censorship and all this stuff, and all the power goes out in the room, right in the middle of it. So it's got to be like HARP or something, right? Oh my God, we're getting spam off of Twitch.
Spam on
All
Twitch.
right. We're connecting up the Twitter space. There's a Twitter space running right now. When it's live, I'll get the link and I'll put it up in the chat. Anyone not familiar with Twitter spaces, it's talk radio basically on Twitter. Really hot right now with the Elon kind of thumb screws loosened a little bit. I mean, you can't say redneck, apparently. I got us banned for a week because I wrote the word redneck. So they still got some of the algorithm to clean out over there, but Twitter spaces are huge, and we're going to be trying to be simulcast with Wogpog Reel. I'm going to put that name up on screen right now. And then we're going to get to the guest because I know time is tight for him. We go to Twitter and find @WogpogReel. He'll be running a space, and in there they'll be talking about similar subjects. We'll be in there for an after show after this, and we might be able to connect and actually take questions out of the space. It's really cool stuff. So that'll be happening in the background. So we should move on because we know that Dr. Smith is on a limited timeline. It's the start of his day over in South Korea. It's the morning over there tomorrow, so he lives a little bit in the future. So, shall we go ahead with the intro, Rain?
Yeah, for sure.
Let's give her. Here we go.
Yep.
All right, and then we're just gonna get you an intro for Wesley here. I'll just take a second. Dr. Wesley Smith. Holy smoke! Look at this! Oh my God! Oh, holy crap! I gotta keep up with it. Dr. Smith. I gave up on trying to read your bio, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the short version too.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's a shorter one, but I figured I could self promote a little bit, but maybe should I do the talking on this one or
Absolutely, yeah. Give us a quick rundown of your life, training, specialties, and what has got you so angry. What are you so angry about?
Yeah. Well, I hope I don't appear angry. That would be bad on my part. I want to appear even keeled. I did my undergrad at the University of Iowa, where I got a BS with honors in neurobiology, and I studied Japanese as a minor. And then simultaneously, I also studied music theory, and I put out 3 demos. We just heard some of the music that I did. And so at that time, I was one of the first people, I should say the first person to show acoustic trauma in Drosophila. So I was a fly neurophysiologist and worked in a lab in fly genetics. So I have a pretty decent background in evolution and genetics. And
Did I read that you were able to prove hearing loss in flies from loud sounds?
Yeah, acoustic trauma, yeah. So when you can do that, then you can utilize flies as a model system for noise-induced hearing loss, right? Because they have transducers in their Johnston's organ, and they can suffer damage through loud noises. And I was the first person to show that, actually.
Wow.
So that was actually, if I may brag a little bit, that thesis that I wrote served as the basis for a paper that was published in PNAS, which is like the 3rd best journal. Like there's Science, there's Nature, and then there's PNAS. And everyone basically knows in science that Science and Nature are basically, they have the most number of retractions. There's a lot of fake stuff that goes in Science and Nature, but PNAS a little bit less. So that's a little bit of a proud sort of thing that I have. So I was like 23, 22, 21, 20 to 22 when I did those experiments, and then 23 or 24 when that was published in PNAS. And most scientists never even get a PNAS paper. Okay, and that was an honors thesis. So I went from basically nowhere in the middle of nowhere in Iowa, well, next to Omaha, growing up there, and then to University of Iowa, and then to UCLA, which is like pretty unlikely for most, can I say rednecks? And so, and then we can talk a bit more about the music stuff too, because that's always something I've been interested in. But then I went to UCLA and I did various things there for my PhD. The first thing I did is I learned how to do patch clamping. I mostly taught myself. I also did some calcium imaging and 2-photon. Then I officially switched to doing optogenetic fMRI in the lab of Li Jinyoung, who was in the lab of Carl Diceroth, who is the creator of optogenetics. Probably won't get a Nobel Prize for that, I think. So I learned a lot from Dr. Lee, who of course learned a lot from Dr. Diceroff. And before she went back to Stanford, in those less than a year and a half, I was a second-year grad student. I got a neuroimage paper. We shopped it around to various journals. I spearheaded the entire project, wrote all the data. Wrote all the data analysis, did all the experiments, did all the figure making. Came up with the initial rationale for why I did the experiments. It's a first author paper again when I was very young. She moved back to Stanford, and so the lab moved with her. I stayed at UCLA though, and I joined the lab of Dr. Sotiris Masmenides, who was a new PI, and I worked on high-density electrophysiology, which is basically how we can understand neural signaling at the level of the spike, but with a lot of spikes. So it's sort of like a big data approach to neuroscience, and studied pharmacology and drug addiction concomitantly with high-density electrophysiology. That became my several papers, and then anyone can look up my my PubMed record. I know a lot of people say that they're scientists or say that they do research, but you can look me up. I have papers. I've gotten grants before. I'm on a grant right now that's roughly equivalent to an R01, which is pretty much unheard of for someone my age. Most people take 10 years after their PhD to get an R01. I'm 34, so there's the equivalent amount of money that's available to me for this grant is nearly unheard of for someone my age.
What's the R stuff? These are levels of financing.
And there's levels of grants.
Right.
So basically, part of the reason why I'm out in Korea is actually to have that sort of ability and freedom to sort of sidestep the system and get the funding that I want to do the experiments that I want to do. After I did my PhD in the lab of Dr. Masmenides, I worked briefly as a postdoc at the Institute of Neurophysics at UCLA, and then I went into industry when COVID happened, because of course everything's better in industry. I worked on the understanding the mechanism of action of Amgen's drug Aimovig, and then after I had done what I wanted to do, and Amgen decided to cut the division because of COVID, and funding sort of needing to be reorganized, I already had this grant lined up, and I just went over to Korea.
Right.
So. It's a lot to talk about, because I've actually done a lot. So
yeah, right. So then let's focus on generally like why we've kind of found each other over on Twitter through mutual friends, and why generally you'd be here tonight. A very esteemed career. What do you feel is going on in the system? Part of the reason why you're in South Korea, right? Academia over here a little bit different than it is over there, right?
Yeah, I would say. There's a lot wrong with American academics, and it stems from how the Western approach to thinking has basically unraveled society. And in a more conservative society such as Korea, certain things are taken at face value, which I think ought to be taken at face value, such as, I don't know, gender and sex. Like if someone is a man or a woman, and this might label me as an extremist or something, but really I just, I have a PhD and I'm from the Midwest. And so I tend to think about things in a more rational way than someone in LA. And I've been in LA for 10 years, more than 10 years. And what it turns out to be the case is that people in America are going down this weird thought process where it's like you can't discuss, biological determination of sex. And you need a degree in biology to say if someone is a man or a woman, right? And it's quite silly, because if you can basically lie to people about something that's very obvious to them at what I call the mesoscale, right? Like reality as you see it and experience it, then there's no telling what you can lie to them about and what sort of next steps you can do to get them to do what you want, because you're basically convincing them of something that doesn't exist at the scale of reality, right? It's very, very, very nefarious. And I don't know if there's some sort of top-down directive for that, or if it's just that the natural inclination of a liberal society is just to become very, very detached from a reality. And this is also, I'd like to discuss that a little bit too, is that the liberal, canonical liberal thought process, right? Like it's something like Jordan Peterson would say is very, open to thoughts, like trait openness is as he would call it, right? But that if you lean too far into the abstraction and trait openness, suddenly everything can become deconstructed, and you have no basis in reality, right? So it's a very dangerous thing, and you can become very, you become more susceptible to other people's emotions, and you become, I guess, very easy to subvert through things like, critical theory and things like that.
That's where we're at in a large way.
And that's what
like you jokingly said, you got to be a biologist to declare whether you're a man or a woman, but they won't say it now.
They won't even say it.
They know they can't say it, and journals are self censoring.
They're self-censoring.
Actual scientific papers are being rejected or retracted.
And it's not just that. It's about IQ, like heritability of IQ, things like that, which is a very hot topic, and it could label someone who discusses these things as some sort of eugenicist, but it's not. It's essential to understand heritability of traits, and you can't discuss these things anymore.
Yeah,
you'll be a label will be thrown at you, and you'll be blacklisted.
Yeah,
and
that was rough enough back in the '90s with bell curve, let alone nowadays.
Absolutely.
he took enough shit for that back then, let alone now. Holy crap! So yeah, do you find a more open atmosphere in South Korea?
What I find it to be the case that scientists generally take things at face value when it comes to papers, which is not that great, because that's one of the things I wanted to talk about is that, when you read a paper, you can never take it at face value. And part of that's a language barrier. I can't always say that though, but part of it is just that there's a tendency, I'm speaking in mass generalities here, but part of it's a language barrier, part of it's accepting what authority tends to tell you, because the hierarchical structure of society, it's thousands of years deep, right? They have far more culture than America, basically, or most Western societies that are democracies that are artificially constructed, right? Korea is a thousands and thousands of year old society, and then so respect for authority, language barrier, and then those tend to make people not really question results so much, right? But at the same time, because it's an overall more conservative society, bogus stuff like give drugs to the poor or give drugs to homeless people, and men are women and women are men, these sort of weird lefty policies would never take hold here, right?
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So I prefer a society that at least has some basic sense making, and then we can discuss problems in the science and how science is done, and that's those issues about not being critical of science. That's also in America as well, honestly. So,
for sure, yeah. I mean, everywhere is kind of. I mean, South Korea to some degree is a liberal society as well, liberal modern society. But those countries over there tend to hold on to some of their traditional values and don't mind, pointing out when something's incompatible with it, which is
absolutely
something that we.
Absolutely.
I mean, I want to say we've lost over here, but I mean, the command and control media structures, the way that we speak to each other en masse has completely lost that. You're not allowed to suggest any of that anymore. And the deleterious effect on science has become painfully, and in my opinion, murderously evident over these last 3 years. How does this, to tie it into what we've been going through over the last 3 years, how did this all look to you when this started coming down? And then so we have academia involved in multiple ways, everything from studies that showed masks don't work being retracted, replaced with bogus ones that prove that they work. How did this all appear to you when it started?
Well, as a scientist, I have to be a little bit, I have to be open-minded and think in abstraction and understand I don't know everything, right? I'd like to know everything. Would I like to know everything? I don't know. Think about that.
How would you know if you knew everything?
Right. So, but I want to learn more. And so that's the thing, is I want to cautiously learn more. Too much caution can yield, authoritarianism, right? So at the start of, what I think you're asking is how did I think about these studies at the start of the quote COVID-19 pandemic, and air quotes, right? Mm-hmm. Is that the question? Yeah.
The question is, I guess a somewhat skeptical, critical view from your position, watching the mechanism of science roll out the way that it did, and the way
Okay.
that these arguments,
So-
the way we were being told what
Yeah.
was happening.
Okay.
How did it seem
So
to you?
So I was at Amgen at the time, and we often discussed, in the hallways, like already, it's difficult to replicate experiments, even for a company that has, the valuation of Amgen. And I'm not going to say too much about my work there because, of course, I can't.
Understood.
But,
sounds like a Bond villain company.
they're a great company.
Okay.
I'll say
It just sounds like that.
No, they're definitely not like Pfizer. They're definitely not like Moderna. They're definitely. I'm not paid or anything by them to say that, but I have nothing but respect for my colleagues there and
Cool.
my director there and things like that. So, but we would discuss, we have all these resources available to us, but certain results in scientific papers we can't reproduce, and that goes back into what I said earlier, that there's a retraction issues with papers in Nature and Science where you can't. I think there's a pretty high percentage of, I don't know the exact percentage of papers in Nature and Science that just get retracted because the data are fraudulent or the methodologies are not sound to analyze the data. If I can't ask you what you did, if you can't show me your data and then explain it to me and then allow me to sorry, I'm just seeing a comment here, like as a laser red dot is on my torso. I'm in Korea. I don't think they can reach me here, but sorry.
I'll bring that up. That's good old Goopy.
That's a good one.
He is legitimately Goopy.
I'm just trying to be
I
respectful.
love Amgen. Understood. We understand. Yeah, to your point, it's recently come out in a few studies that up to 50% of published data is unreproducible.
And like 1%
I'm pulling that off the top of
even.
my head. Right. This was this big like meta study that got a lot of press on, maybe on the, to the center right side of politics. Of course, it hasn't gotten much traction anywhere else. Found that all these studies that are out there, not all of them, a massive amount of studies that are published are unreproducible and haven't been reproduced, and people that have tried can't reproduce them, and it doesn't seem to have
even at companies with lots of resources. That should be surprising. If I have a team of experts who all have PhDs and we all have basically nearly unlimited funding and we can't reproduce your freaking results, there's something wrong, right?
Yeah.
So I'm seeing this COVID stuff happen right in early 2020, and I speak a little bit of Japanese, right? I speak some Korean as well. I'm a bad polyglot. I understand a good percentage of what I hear, and I can have pretty decent conversations. Chinese, I'm not that great at. I can read Hansa or kanji or however you want to say, but my wife actually speaks Chinese quite well, so we would talk about what's going on in China. We'd see this footage of people just keeling over and just wonder, like, okay, is there something going on here? Is this a psyop? Is the CCP playing at something again? And so being cautious and not accepting everything at face value is sort of where I'm going with early 2020, and then I started reading papers about how, like, okay, depending on the context, certain types of mask usage might work. So that's a little feather in your cap to think, okay, a lot of things depend in science, right? There's no like, they work, they don't work. Like, have a little nuance, I think, is the most important thing. Yeah. And, there's some Korean studies where they take, Korean KF94 masks or whatever, and they have people who have COVID, like they cough on a petri dish, right? While they're wearing masks or not wearing masks, and they could eventually culture or not culture the viruses, which I thought was pretty cool because they're actually trying to culture the virus, right? So it's more of an in-depth experiment. And in that context, I think masks did work. But then if you consider that you're going to be in the room with someone for more than an hour or even more than 20 minutes, maybe they don't work, right? So it's like, it's all context dependent. And that's what I want to get to about facts not being real. It's like when someone tells you, oh yeah, this is the way this works 100% of the time. Masks work, masks don't work. COVID is this, blah, 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 blah. It's all context dependent. It's all like basically Bayesians all the way down. You can't just say with certainty about anything when you want to have a scientific discussion about something. You actually have to get in the weeds of something. Like, I've been fact checked on LinkedIn before I was banned multiple times, finally eternally banned by some person that God knows where, who doesn't have nearly the credentials that I have, because, of this fact here says that Wes is wrong. Like,
On
do
LinkedIn.
you even know? On LinkedIn or on Facebook or something like that.
What'd you do on
Facebook.
LinkedIn?
Just talking about the gene therapies, man. Like, it's
wow. LinkedIn
basically posting abstracts. Yeah. So if I want to get a job, I have to find other means, or I should become like a public intellectual and get paid for appearances. That would be nice too. But if I want to do science, I can't count on LinkedIn anymore, right? For my next step. So like if you really consider how science is done, you have to really understand every observation that we make as a scientist is built in abstraction, and the thought process is just riddled with abstractions. That's the only way to think about the world. I was thinking about this as well. Like the regular person, you can think about like how a car is built, right? Like engineering, things like that. You have a concrete idea about how something is built and how it functions, right? But the scientist deals with abstraction nearly all the time. You can't see a cell without a microscope. You can't see a protein without like X-ray crystallography. You can't see how these things are interacting. You can't see an action potential of a spike without you can't even see it visually. It's an electrochemical phenomenon, right? So all these things that we're doing are all basically based on abstraction, right? So there's a lot of wiggle room with how you interpret results in a paper, first of all. Everyone has different understanding of the literature because we've all read different papers. Some of them are the same, like really seminal papers. But how we construct experiments is all based off of abstraction. How we construct hypotheses is based off of our interpretation of literature, which may or may not be accurate, right? And how we interpret data is riddled with issues with how calibrated our instruments are, how well we understand the technical use of our instruments. It's really just, if you take nothing away from this, it's just that science is full of error and full of abstraction, which is important for the construction of a cogent worldview, right? You have to have a way of understanding, A to Z, right? But you have to be abstract and think about it. It's not concrete, and most people can't think in abstraction in that way. And I recently found out that most people don't even have an internal monologue, so I don't even know how that works.
I know.
Like,
my ex-girlfriend didn't have one.
How does
Explains a lot. This is what I was talking about. I think there were a couple big papers. This is in Nature.
Absolutely, yeah.
So these guys were they I think I just saw a 70% number. But again, how were they counting? I'm not sure. And then PNAS, the one that you said, there's a new paper here. Well, this is 2018. And their abstract says this is why that paper is wrong. So, as you said, there's lots of room for interpretation and abstraction and such.
And think about like this, okay? So we want to talk about really the fundamental like fact of an experiment. Like you go collect data and then something happens. Like let's do something like as simple as counting how many times you got neurons to spike in the brain with your electrode array, okay? So if I plunk an electrode array into a mouse brain or a mouse brain slice or something like that, I'm going to get spikes, right? Action potentials, right? But there's no like method to just like count it, or like it doesn't tell you, oh, I got a spike here, I got a spike here. You get a time series of electrical potentials, right? And you have to do math on that to extract the waveforms and then see if your waveform comes out of the noise or not. And then, depending on how the literature does it versus how you need to do it in your preparation, which is different, it could be different, you can see that there is a lot of wiggle room for determining what ground truth is in your data set. So if you count your spikes differently because of how you extract your waveforms and how you cancel out noise and how you do whatever wavelet analysis, things like that, you're going to get wildly different results. And that should kind of be either obvious to you guys, or it should be wildly shocking. Like even as something as simple as spike sorting can leave you with wildly different results in how you do it. And this has implications for all sorts of things in neuroscience, right?
Right, and leads to. So when everyone, when things are really going down, that's when I got hot and heavy on Twitter, and I'm just like up against people who are arguing for everything: the masks, the shots, the lockdowns, all that stuff, and like they're always just like paper,
no nuance.
Paper. Can I see a paper? Here's my paper. paper? Are you an expert? Are
Did
you
they
a
read it?
doctor? Well, of course they, I'd get in arguments with some people, they probably did, right? But at the same time, to go with what you're saying, I mean, there is abstraction, there is room for interpretation. There's the paper that you're pulling, it doesn't necessarily prove your point 100%.
It never does. It never does.
Yeah.
And so I was just thinking about this earlier today as well. It's just that, like, okay, I studied addiction. One of the things I studied was addiction, to be more accurate, and the difference of the role of the infralimbic versus prelimbic cortex in drug seeking. And some literature would suggest that there's a sort of a counterbalance between the regions and how an animal would seek for drugs. But it's not necessarily a slam dunk in either direction. And even how you define the regions of the brain is also up for interpretation. Like, as you unpeel the layers, there's a lot of room for interpretation. So how can you say that anything is a scientific fact? The most truthful way of getting at this is that there's heuristics for telling you what's more accurate or not. And that heuristic is, do you have multiple sources of data, multiple types of different data, right, to lead you in that direction? And one of the things that I wanted to say was that I saw something funny that, like, Scott Adams said on Twitter, right? And he was did you see the thing that he said recently? He's like, no, I literally want to know how the people who were right knew in advance. They know, but won't explain it.
Yeah, see, he's leaning into this, like, almost like, why didn't you tell me? If only you had told me, then I wouldn't have gotten the shots, and I would have joined the team. And he's just like so pathetic.
And then Ian Miles Chung, or Still Gray, whatever, said, not as a reply to that, but as a reply to Elon Musk about something else, said, this is why it's so important to have multiple primary sources of information. And that's really, as I don't know what he's really notable for, but he's popular on Twitter. But he said some pretty decent things, and that's one of the decent things, is that you have to have various generalist forms of knowledge about things to really fact check things, right? Like, what is being alive if not basically trying to intelligently navigate the world with the inputs that you have available to you in order to maximize your success in the future. By some definitions, that's what intelligence actually is maximizing information entropy to have the most positive outcomes for the system in the future. Okay,
right.
That's just look up. That's one definition of intelligence.
Which,
so,
for most people, comes down to, like, breakfast, lunch, dinner, get through work, Netflix.
That's not a way to live life for me.
I mean, that's why we are where we are. That all people needed was the experts say you got to stay in your house. The experts say you got to get a shot. The experts say you got to stay locked down, and it's good for at least half the population.
Which is funny. It's funny because you have, like, there's this, go back to the bell curve, right? There's this idea of, like, the midwit curve, right? And you have people who seem to have pretty good response about the virus, which were, like, on the lower end of the IQ curve, right? Like this troglodyte-looking guy in the meme. Actually, can you pull up the midwit meme so people can see what this is about?
Oh, what's it called?
Midwit. You don't know this midwit curve? Midwit bell curve.
No, I don't think so. All right,
I love this one.
Here we go. Bell curve.
The MIDWIT midwit curve, right?
This will just be an image?
Yeah, you should be able to pull it up.
Yeah.
And so basically on the left,
okay,
pick any of those. So basically on the left-hand side, you have this sort of troglodyte-looking guy, and, like, he's saying, like, oh, if my grandma, what is it, like, pick any of those. He's got, like, this troglodyte look, right?
Is this a template?
Right, it's a template, but it's like, give ball the best player on the one end is, like, the really stupid take, but actually tends to be the right take, right?
Yeah.
And then on the far right, you have this high IQ 150 take, give ball the best player.
You have to move the ball to get everyone involved and get the defense scrambling. More than 300 passes per game is correlated with winning, so we have to create a culture of getting to that number every night. ISO ball is so boring to watch and never works.
So you can see that, like, for something that's, like, simple as, like, will I get COVID or not, right? Or should I get the vaccine or not? Things like that. People on the left hand of that curve, like, God will protect me, like, just straight up, like, magic, right? Or, like, straight. I'm not saying be religious. Religion is great. It's a great heuristic for understanding things. It's lindy as hell, right? It's like super valuable for understanding morality, things like that. Okay, but like straight up, like my faith is my shield. Like, is this D&D? Like, are you a cleric or something?
Well, this is actually a great example of that. So you've got, if you look at the people of strong faith, instantly resistant to the entire narrative, and you find a massive chunk of Christians who are just immediately like, I'm not doing this. I don't want that shot in my arm. I'm not doing this. Fuck you, because they've got a pillar of truth that they can cling to. But on the exact opposite side, so I guess that's the one side of the midwit curve, and then the other side of the faith midwit curve is flat Earth and QAnon. So the same people that are like, fuck you, government, I'm not listening to you, I'm an independent person, I'm a critical thinker, I'm not doing this. At the same time, they're like, the flat Earth rectifies what I believe about the Bible, so therefore I believe that too. So it's like, it opens eyes and closes eyes. It's got to be balanced.
And what's funny is that the behavioral output that you have is going to be the same. You either take the shot or you don't, or you stay locked down.
That's right. Yeah, the flat Earth part of it doesn't make any difference in your daily life, but the other one is saving lives.
Right. So I find this very interesting. Is that like John Cooey mentioned this as well. It's like the there is no virus people had actually a pretty good response to the COVID pandemic, even if there are definitely viruses, right? Because their behavior doesn't shift when something in the micro scale comes out, because they have their own heuristic for understanding the world. They see the world as it is. They see the world as I like to call it, in mesoscale, right? Like the senses that you have, that you perceive things, that like, you know, my computer is here, my monitor is here, my headphones are here. Like this sort of thing you can't lie to me about unless it's this big brother and you're telling me to doubt the senses and my own senses to.
We're getting there.
Right. But like that sort of low IQ person, or that low IQ take, just accepts the world, their version of the world, as it is at that scale, and doesn't necessarily question it, but they just live their life, right? And then you have the other end of the midwit curve, where it's like people IQ 150 who are super curious and need to look into everything and need to look at papers and multiple types of papers and are familiar with multiple types of techniques. And then they're like, okay, yeah, I'm not going to get the shot either, right? Because they looked into it too. It's like, but what they do is they don't let someone else inform them of what the mesoscale world is. They see it for themselves, and then they interpret that, and they take papers and they inform their decisions based off of that. At both ends of the spectrum is reality is a thing, right? And I'm not going to let other people tell me what reality is, and I'm going to come to my conclusion about that, right? One end is faith or being a low IQ person. The other end is like being high IQ and being super critical. And then at the middle end, you have like the people who are like, "Backs me up, daddy, like put more chips in me," or whatever, right? And it's because they are just accepting whatever the screen tells them, and they think that's the smart thing to do, because that's the herd mentality has its benefits as well. But that's I've never seen a funnier meme. Like that's my favorite one because it explains so much about human behavior.
Completely missed me. I'm gonna generate a few of those today, I think. That's great.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so then what is a path forward to raise the middle a bit, because it is the middle that decides what the other sides do.
Okay, I came prepared with a couple of things I'd like to talk about. All
right.
I know you maybe wanted to have me on the show because I'm like an expert or something like that. And I had some like facts to tell you or some interesting story to tell you, and I could talk more about my experiments or all these sort of facts, figures, things like that. But that's not, I don't think, why you had me on, right? Like I wanted to talk about heuristics for sense making and like why I don't believe in facts, which I hope I did somewhat, right?
Yeah, you started us on that.
Yeah.
So one of the things So I think the biggest thing I could share to bring up the sense making a bit is that you need to be a generalist, right? Like the best way to make sense of the world is to understand as much as you can generally about the world and fit it into your own cogent worldview. Think about it like this. If I don't know if you guys ever played D&D or anything like that, but like if you have a wizard who's like can only cast fireballs, you're gonna just die because you need to be able to cast other stuff. You need to learn other things. If you're a scientist and you only do one type of experiment, your career is gonna be not go anywhere, right? and you have too much specialization, they'll just silo away your knowledge, and you'll just be chasing new versions of the same technique in order to make more complex hammers, which you can just view everything as a nail, and it's not how reality works. And to get to what Scott Adams is saying, you need to answer like how people who were right knew in advance. There's a good amount of generalists who thought about things very generally, and they looked into it more, and then they realized, okay, this is how I should cogently alter my behavior if I need to at all. And Brett Weinstein said, and I'm going to quote him because it's a very good quote, but being a generalist is different. Like doing synthesis of multiple different types of things is different. One of the things that has absolutely unhooked reason for most of what we would call the intelligentsia, or like the midwits basically, is that they think that there's a method to go to a place called the literature and look at something called the data and then derive from it a description of what's actually taking place. And that'd be great if you could do it, but it's not. Like there's a complex dynamic phenomenon that's being analyzed by a corrupt, in many ways, feeble academic structure. And what the answer it comes to just doesn't add up. You need to have a toolkit that allows you to borrow from various different disciplines and vantage points to be able to put together the best explanation for phenomena that you can be pretty certain are actually real. And that's just a different game than just sitting down and with some data from a paper and coming to your own conclusions. You have to understand how to weigh it and understand the experiments that were actually run and the caveats with those experiments and what the data actually imply. And this is just something that most people are not in general used to, right? Most people just punt and they list to Eric Topol, and that's where the end quotes. And that's where the quote ends. Sorry, and I would like to say that Eric Topol also blocked me on Twitter. So like I know that I'm probably have better sense making than him. I hope he hears that.
For the audience, who's Eric Topol?
He's like this really famous cardiologist or cardiac related scientist out in California. And he has a lot of papers, and he's a public. I guess you could say he's like a public expert, right? So he's also like a proponent of the vax and all these things. It's not a cogent worldview to support what he thinks. So I think I'm a generalist in that sense, similar to Weinstein. I've tried to have as wide of a vantage point as possible, going from invertebrate genetics and evolutions to systems neuroscientist, statistics, time series analysis. I've been in academics, I've been in industry, done pharmaceutical research, I speak multiple languages. What I care about is how I can use all of these things to inform my worldview, right? And I think that's the most important thing for anyone to do, is just to read as much as you can, like Jordan Peterson says, read more, and then you can come up with your own interpretation of things. But you must always look at reality and not believe the screens so much. Like you can or see what a paper says and just take it at face value. Like what's real is what's in front of you, what your eyes see, and that's like the most. Your senses are the most fundamental expression of what's true, because you're alive, aren't you? And so if you have multiple different streams of information, that's what your brain is doing. It's taking multiple different streams of information, touch, taste, hearing, sight, and constructing a worldview that is an approximation of reality, right? Even though your eyes take in information and flip it, and your brain unflips it, right? Like the world is an illusion, right? And your brain just flips it together and splices it together, and you go based off of that. Like you can fool people, of course. People can take drugs, right? And you can have an altered expression of what reality is, or altered interpretation of what reality is. You could be really sleepy, right? Or you could be, super angry, right? Your emotions and your brain states can alter how you interpret reality. But 90%, 99% of the scenarios, what you see is real, right? Like that's the first thing. And if someone tries to convince you of something otherwise, they're basically trying to tell you to doubt physics. Like when someone says, that's the crazy thing. It's like when I read the origin of the paper, the proximal origins of SARS-CoV-2. First of all, I read it and it's just like, okay, 3 pages. There's no statistics. They're saying basically saying like a bat flew 1,000 kilometers to Wuhan or something. Like this doesn't make any sense.
This is like the paper, right? Like this is the bat wet market. This is the paper, right?
Like 3 years ago. I'm just reading this. I'm like, no stats, two figures, if you could even call them figures. It's not even a paper. It's a letter to the editor. If you just look at the type of submission that it is.
Really?
And then, it's a letter to the editor. There's another thing. Why believe science? Like a lot of it's just, science is all narratives. Like I wanted to say this too. It's like we're all just telling each other stories.
Yeah.
Like unless it's something that you can reproduce at mesoscale. Like if like classical mechanics, right? or like I cut open a mouse, right, and I see where its brain is, and I take that, and like the next step is like to put it under a microscope and see what I can see. Like there's certain reproducible phenomenon, but once you get into really abstractions and use of really technical equipment, there's a lot of room for interpretation. But like you can't fake mechanics, right? You can't fake a bullet being fired, right? Like you can't like what I'm getting is that there's a hierarchy of what is truthful in science, and fundamental stuff like accepting that you're alive and accepting that your senses are accurate. Everything stems from that, rather than just letting someone else tell you what to think and letting someone else tell you, oh yeah, this is exactly how this goes in all contexts. No, you actually have to see how things are reproduced at the real scale, and then go from there. And a lot of people just say, oh yeah, science is true, and whatever scientists say is true, and then just like Weinstein says, they just punt. No, you actually have to be critical of it and be able to reproduce it, and you actually have to further examine it, and it has to be stand up to rigorous examination. All of our best hypotheses or best theories are just stories that we tell. Theory of relativity, right? Or Einstein had to throw out pieces of math to get that to work. It's a great approximation of reality, but it at the end of the day, a lot of the things are best guesses, right? Yeah. Our narratives are, when we tell a story, when I write a paper, right, I'm trying to convince you of something. That's basically all papers are, is that it's just convincing other scientists who then can convince the public of the way certain things go. And it's not that science is done through consensus. That's like a popularity game. Good science is done through consilience of different types of evidence to point towards a better approximation of reality. We're basically like, you've heard of the metaphor of the blind man touching different parts of the elephant, right?
Yeah.
And so basically, if I have electrophysiology equipment and someone else has, pull down assays and other protein purification techniques and things like that, and someone else does behavior, and someone else does imaging and things like that, what we can do is we can get a better understanding of each of these parts of the problem, and then form a better sort of, not a consensus of evidence, but a more cogent worldview based off of different aspects of the evidence coming together, right? And that's where science, that's the power of science. That's where we construct a good worldview.
You make an appeal.
We're all blind.
Yeah, and you make an appeal to more generalizing yourself in the world. Absolutely. And in your field, which is, I'm hearing more and more from even from people who are well within scientific community, some quite well known, kind of YouTuber level scientists, and some very renowned scientists appealing for this kind of approach, especially as we're, the edges are fraying as we try to go deeper and prove, say, like the standard model or general relativity, like trying to nail it and just get that final proof in or reconcile them, and it's just getting kind of uglier as you go. People are going like, wait, we've got to open our minds a little bit. We got to, because it's been like 70 years of, no, this is the way it is. This is absolutely correct. It's the most successful theory ever. Almost an anger to challenging it. I'm just bringing this up as an example. It seems to be endemic throughout all of science to some degree. This kind of like people just end up on perches protecting their zone of speciality, when instead,
because academics is a pyramid scheme, basically.
Oh yeah, elaborate on that.
Well, you basically train people for jobs that don't exist, so you have to protect your expertise. That's essentially where it comes from. So
you train people for jobs that don't exist.
Absolutely. So people want to become professors, and once they do their PhD, like they teach you how to become a professor. They teach you how to be a successful academic. They don't teach you how to go into industry and make a drug. They don't teach you unless they teach you for a skill set of how to read papers and do experiments that your advisor wants you to do. Then you become a little clone of your advisor, right? And I've had like four advisors during my PhD. I'm kind of a disagreeable person, I guess I could say. And not that I'm hopefully not a not nice person, but I tend to think for myself. And so I don't want to be a clone of anyone, right? I don't want to do that. But a lot of people, they just sign up, they go in, they do a couple of techniques, they publish papers related to that technique, and they get further and further into that specialization, hoping that there's a faculty job lined up for them after that. But the faculty are still alive and they're holding on to their tenure positions. So good luck with that, unless there's more universities being made. And those universities also probably have a bunch of DEI professionals in them and a bunch of bureaucrats and administrators sucking up the funds anyway. So good luck with that. It's not going to happen. So academics basically train other academics for something that doesn't exist, right? For a future that doesn't exist.
But a carrot that's permanently there, right? And then you probably a massive feeling that you gotta not rock the boat all the way through, just hoping that maybe that's going to open up. Can't rock the boat. Can't be controversial.
I don't care.
Yeah, so there you go, right? And it's worked out okay.
Well, I had to move countries, so not everyone has that ability.
Well, good point. Did you feel that you were hitting a wall over here that wasn't available here?
So I wanted to continue to work in the pharmaceutical industry, but you had to have the vaccine for every job, and I'd already had my grant lined up, but I was just seeing if you could if I could just seeing if anywhere else in America would be interested in having me as as an expert neuroscientist. And every job, and I wrote about this on my Substack too, which although people read it, apparently I haven't updated in months, and I should probably update more. But basically, the first post I talk about is like, hey, I wrote this on an application for a job. You need to have the vaccine, and here's why you should. I wouldn't take it for a variety of pieces of evidence from multiple different types of specialties that would suggest that it's not a good idea. And because of that, I'm thinking, okay, so you have to basically submit to the PSYOP, and you have to alter your own. You have to lower your standards of bodily autonomy, and you have to let people tell you what to do about your own health decisions to have a job. This is insane. I'm not going to do that, right? So it's more than the academic politics of it. It's just literally about my health and my own autonomy. So I'm not playing that game. So I live my own life.
Excellent. I'm just getting everyone here to your Substack. You caught me right in the middle of a technical thing there.
Oh boy, yeah. So the most recent.
That is your Substack, correct?
It is. It is. And
yeah.
I really ought to post more to that, but I don't have an incentive really.
Yeah. Well, I mean, well, it's like what we're doing too, right? I mean, we did like a full year of this with like 15 subs. You're like, there's a person in chat, oh boy, and now we're like, well, yeah, we're not even like in the middle of the bell curve yet, but we're getting there. But it's the regularity. It's showing up every Friday. It's having fascinating guests like you and keeping up the conversation. It's the only thing that's going to pay off in the long run. A good associate of mine, Matthew Arrett, he and his wife both publish twice a day to Substack. But a lot of it is their old articles that they've been writing for years that go on to their website. You can schedule it. So you got old writings kicking around, man. Load it all up, schedule them out, cut them up into bits, schedule it, and then it'll publish while you do your mouse research.
Yeah, I wish I could do that. There's only so many hours in the day, and a lot of stuff that I do is related to my experimentation and my publishing of academic papers, which
of course
I'm using it as a way to advance my career. Sadly, I have to play a certain amount of the game. That's just the way it is.
Preach to the choir here, man.
Yeah.
I still got to earn a living.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it would be wonderful if people would just donate to my Substack and donate to my Twitter and stuff, so that I'd have more incentive to do those things.
What?
Sorry. But yeah,
people can do that.
Wow, I know. It's amazing, right? There was a couple more beats that I wanted to hit on here because unless you guys have other questions,
we'll chime in if we do. We will direct the flow if we feel we need to, but otherwise, this is fascinating. Getting into the philosophy of it all. This is super cool.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I think it's important you have to have some sort of philosophical understanding. Otherwise, you're just a technician. And that's another thing is that let's see, God, where was I?
Philosophy is in many ways the only thing that can kind of compete with religion.
It is. It is.
Two different faces of the same thing, really, in a lot of ways.
So, so I wanted to talk briefly about abstraction, and so I mentioned that like abstraction is the only way you can look at the world, the unseen micro or macro scale or nanoscale world. Scientists have to think abstraction constantly, right? And then they use tools which may have errors and techniques that have errors to transform the signals that are abstraction and make them interpretable. This abstraction is lost on the layman and is oversimplified to the point of a lie and often glossed over in textbooks. So if you just think about things only in terms of rote memorization, and I'm not saying throw away your textbooks. And in fact, I think textbooks prior to the year 2020 are probably going to be very valuable.
Good point.
You guys.
Good point, Rain. We're going to get a side business going, man.
No,
fill up the barn with textbooks before woke.
Before woke and the whole, mRNA vaccines are vaccines narrative took hold. I just saw actually, I was at the bookstore, one of the biggest bookstores in Korea, some Korean test prep materials for kids who are going to college, right? They call this test sunung, and it's like the most important test they'll ever take in their lives. And the biology part of the test had a question about how vaccines work. And the COVID, swear to God, COVID-19 vaccines or transfection techniques were a example of how vaccines work. And I was just like, this cannot be how you teach a group of kids, a cohort of kids, to understand health choices and vaccine technology. It is just flat out a lie, flat out a misrepresentation of fundamental aspects of immunology. Makes no sense, but that's going on to how they will understand and apply to college and how they'll think about vaccines. And millions of kids take this test every year.
And combined with the overnight changing of the definition of vaccine on Wikipedia and the CDC all at one giant rush, and everything's redefined along with the term man or woman or anything like that. We're seeing now this ability to even take that away. So, wow. So continue with your point.
So yeah, if you fail to consider things abstractly, not too abstractly, but just to a point of like when you think about things, right? And instead of relying, if you only rely on rote memorization, that makes you a technician. Like if you're only doing experiments and only doing what your advisor tells you, you're just a technician and you're not really a scientist. And I'm not denigrating technicians. Their handiwork enables great research, right? But there's a difference between the two. The scientist ideally is nearly a philosopher. And in the past, that really wasn't much different. They're actually, scientists and philosopher were pretty much the same thing. And artist was also kind of thrown in there as well. That's also kind of why I think that like my appreciation of music and love for performing and things like that, it's kind of related to being a very creative scientist. I just wanted to put that out there. Like you rote memorization is not science, and rote performance of experimentation, and even if you're good at interpreting that results, it's not science. Science is the framework for which you cogently come to a worldview that is as accurate a representation of reality, even if we're all blind and even if we're all touching different parts of the elephant. You have to constantly question it, and that's all that it is. Is if you can question it constantly, if it stands up to scrutiny, then that's what the science is, right? And it's more of a philosophy, it's more of an epistemology than it actually is, what the scientific method is. Like, have a hypothesis and blah blah blah, like do X, Y, and Z, and then you're only doing science. I know many of great scientific thinkers, and even some of them on Twitter too, who are pretty much scientists because their first thing is that they're curious, right? And that's the core of it. Is you have to have a thinking, curious mind.
I think the questioning is what you're hitting on. I don't
Absolutely.
feel like we're promoting this at all in our Western culture. I don't think this is being taught. Can it be taught? I guess is where I want to go with it. What's the solution?
So I think, good question. So
easy, go.
Do you want a detailed answer? I can do.
Let's do bullet points and break it down.
So when you have animals performing a behavioral task, they often split up into multiple distributions of how they respond. Like there's usually like, how do I put it? If I give a drug like cocaine to mice, they're not always going to respond the same way. But scientists will want you to think that like you can bin data up nicely into a a result that gives you like statistical significance with a t-test. You know, you're familiar with the t-test and p-values, right?
No.
No. Okay. Ooh. Okay. Tough crowd.
Yeah.
So,
No. A couple of monkey musicians here, man. That's
Okay.
the whole point.
All
You gotta explain it to us.
Okay. So, right,
p-values. No, it doesn't mean anything. But I mean, like, you know, you can quickly explain.
when you
what
have
those
a
are.
difference between, if let's say I have, thinking about this from like a very general perspective.
Yeah.
Let's say I treat a population of animals with a drug, and then one is or a population of animals, and we separate them into two groups. One gets drug, one doesn't get drug, and I'm measuring some quantifiable phenomena as a result. I don't know, just like did some marker for some gene appear after the drug? Okay, did some indicator of some behavioral change appear after the drug? Did number of spikes change or something like that? Some abstraction. Okay, did that change? The only canonically accepted method to check for changes in scientific literature is to do some sort of statistical test. Oftentimes when you have two groups, you do a t-test, which is a test for a statistically significant difference between the two groups. Okay,
Yeah.
You can look it up. It's Wilcoxon rank sum also works if you have a small n. I kind of like non-parametric methods because I don't like to use too many animals because you end up sacrificing too many animals, and why should I do that? You know, I feel a little bit bad every time I cut a mouse's head off. So
Yeah, damn. I was actually going to ask you. I was going to ask you about that, but you covered it yourself. Heard.
What? Oh yeah, I mean, sorry.
Yeah. That's something that I think about a lot. Sometimes I wonder if that the kind of built-in mass killing thing with modern science is perhaps like, I don't know, taking it all to the dark side a little bit too much.
I think to each scientist, you have to become a little bit of a monster to do science, to do in vivo biology.
Sure.
You absolutely do. There's like, look, I'll just tell you straight up. I kill mice for a living, and I think Jonathan Cooey also said that. Like at one point, he's like, "Yeah, I kill mice for a living."
Yeah.
Let me do this one. Yeah, I kill mice for a living, like something like that, right?
Sorry, that voice.
Sorry, JJ.
Kill mice. Yeah, he's awesome.
So, but I do like you open up their rib cage, you perfuse solution into their hearts and make it spread throughout their brain. You cut it off, and then you can pull the brain out and you slice it up, and then you record it. Like I do that, and that's just it's grim, it's grisly, and like I kind of just gotta push the feeling down as I do it. But like I don't want to do that too much. So like you can use other types of statistics to work with small amount of test subjects, and not everyone also knows that either, right? And so there's a again, there's a hierarchy to statistics as well. Like there's what is appropriate and what is inappropriate to do in a specific context, and you have to be very familiar with a general understanding of maths to make the right call on that. So I was saying t-tests. Can you jog my memory on why we were talking about that? Sorry.
One more drones dying. Look at this guy. I can't even believe it here. He's like,
it was your talk, man. We were talking about what are we gonna do? What do we do about it? That's what started off the whole thing, and you were going through the bullet list of how we can teach people to be curious again.
So right, okay, I got off on a tangent, but basically, when you compare, so in the past decade, there's been more of a push to not do this, but previously you would just take your variability in your results and just really just turn it into bars. Like you have a bar plot between your groups. So like, yeah, this bar plot was bigger, so the drug worked in this group, right? And that's a vast oversimplification of what happens when you do drug studies, right? You get a variability in response. And that's why I studied in my thesis as well. Like you need to look at the variability, I think, in how your animals respond to something, so you can quantify the actual the variable that actually controls the response. But a lot of that's lost, and you just oversimplify, and you just you hide your data a lot of times too. So there's been a push to not hide data, to actually show the actual data that are within the plots. So you can see, oh yeah, actually your group response is bimodal, right? And so what I was going to say is that this is how we get. I'm bringing it back now.
Yeah.
Whether or not people behave in a curious manner is along a spectrum, right? And there might even be like some sort of bimodal aspect where it's like some people are super curious and critical and some people aren't. And I have that feeling that that's how it is, because even in mice, when they want to see when you food deprive them or give them a drug, you also tend to present cues that predict the arrival of that drug or food, right? And half of the animals or some sort of distribution of animals really prefers to stick around that cue of the drug or of the food, and the other half straight goes towards that cue, straight goes towards that food. And this is the work of Shelley Flagel, and it has to do with dopamine signaling, right? Motivational salience. And so, can you teach people to change their own dopaminergic circuitry and their motivational circuitry in the brain, even when you control for whether or not these are litter mates, like these basically siblings, right? Or like super related groups of animals? They have different ways of responding to the same cues, right? And this is a fundamental expression of how their motivational circuitry is different, and it's based off of God knows what genes development, even if they're just developing in the same way. So can you teach people to be curious when curiosity is fundamentally tied to dopaminergic circuitry and attention to rewards and attention to novelty, things like that? I would say no, you can't. You can tell people to kind of be mindful about it, but at the end of the day, there's groups of people that are just going to be that way, right?
Yeah,
so,
I think
so
we all know,
that's the answer to your.
We all know plenty of people like
question.
that where you're actually just sitting there wondering, like, are you capable of questioning this?
No, I would say genetically some of these people cannot.
Right.
And this is related to their motivational circuitry that they can't. And you have to, if you wanted to, you'd have to basically. One of my favorite philosophers is a modern day monk who's in Korea. His name is Pumyun Sunim, and I've had the opportunity to talk to him actually briefly as well. But one of the things he harps on is like, to fundamentally change the nature of a person, you have to basically torture them. You have to basically, and it's not like people want to sign up to do that, but if you yourself want to be a more curious person, if you notice yourself not being curious or something, maybe like have an electric shocker or a shock button, and you give yourself a little bit of pain to then, change your behavior. Because people don't really respond to, weak signaling. You have to respond to something that's very strong, right? And if you notice yourself doing something that you have a habit you want to stop, right? Maybe let's say one day you want to stop smoking, right? If you ever reach for a cigarette, give yourself an electric shock and see how you respond to that.
Right? I've thought about
it.
And
he's a very pragmatic guy, and he talks about things. He jokes around a lot too, but there's definitely some aspect of that's bared out in data if you read the papers on changing someone's behavior, changing how an animal responds to behavior.
So that's encouraging. That is exactly where I was going to go with that, as a joke, but not a joke. Like for these people, be basically like
they need to
put them
suffer.
in a cage, and you'd have to be like, look, the average global temperature hasn't risen. All the models are wrong. And they're like, no, climate change is real. And you're like, okay, well, no lunch for you. And maybe do that. But that's what I'm saying. Like, you have to put these people in a camp and like slap it out of them and shock it out of them or something. Make it crucial to their existence that they ask more questions.
So some people, you've noticed that like the flow chart from being like a centrist or even left wing like me, like I would consider myself a classical liberal. Once you get red pilled, you never really go back, right? Once you see how things work in the real world, and you see things affecting you based off of leftist policies, you take the red pill or whatever, or black pill or scientific pill or whatever, you don't go back, right? You've suffered to the point where there was a consequence for you, and you've changed your viewpoint of how you think about the world. You can't unthink that stuff, right? That's very important. Is that people who don't have that the luxury of not being, not suffering, the luxury of living their life being of the laptop class or whatever you want to call it, of work from home or whatever. That's all a luxury. They need to suffer. I'm not saying that they should, but if they wanted, if to enact a change in how they perceive the world and their behavior needs to alter, or if they wanted that, there has to be some degree of suffering. And that's also how I think about knowledge as well, is that for you to actually truly understand something, you need to suffer a bit to obtain that knowledge. You need to have the frustration of not knowing what the right question is, to be able to think about the question at hand, to be able to then learn something. Like I can lecture. I've taught neuroscience at UCLA for like 2 years, right? Like hundreds of kids, right? You can look it up. It's you could find out that I did that. Neuroscience 101A, Molecules to Mind, whatever.
Yeah.
I taught these courses. Whether or not you read the book or not, like, is that really knowledge? Like, you can, of course, like I said, you should memorize certain things and should know how things were done in the past and have basic understanding of these things. But once you actually get into the nitty gritty of an experiment, you need to actually suffer a bit, spend hours doing that experiment, ask the right questions, understand the state of the literature and what questions people are asking, and understand even the biases that certain scientists might have. You have to suffer. There's a lot of work that goes into that, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that goes into that. Then you can say that you actually have a knowledge of something. Other than that, you're basically skimming the surface, right? And it's important to skim the surface, right? But I get a lot of people asking me, "Oh, Wes, what does this mean? You know, what's your thoughts on this, Wes?" Like, well, that's a very general question. Like, you have to suffer and think before you ask me or ask a scientist who's serious about something. What about a very serious question, so that I can give you a contextually appropriate response that's intelligent. Like, even today, some PhD student in Washington asked me, "What are your thoughts on fMRI?" Like, bro, I wrote a paper on functional fMRI, coupling that to optogenetics in vivo. Like, do you really want my take on that? That's a very long paper, and I like, your question sucks, man. Like, just come. Like,
do better.
When I was your age, I had a PNAS paper. Like, when I was your age, I was staying up 36 hours in the lab to understand these things. So, you
sound like me when I was asked to teach people drums.
That's the thing.
It's like, bro,
people
like fucking
want
eighth notes on the hi hat. Come on, let's go.
Knowledge doesn't come.
Why can't you do this? Yeah. So then, are we watching a time right now where emotional and I guess intellectual trauma is taking the place of that struggle? Where we're seeing people,
I think so, and
get the red pill. People, we're seeing like those Twitter spaces. You're seeing all these like big ass mainstream doctors that are in there now that push the fucking vax. Are in there now going like,
or whatever, and his dad dying, and you know, it's a tragedy as it is, but that's his moment.
Yeah,
he needed that.
Yeah,
he must have needed that.
Yeah, maybe that's where we're at. And maybe we're at a point.
And here's, you know, maybe this is a take that I've thought myself, and I share it rarely, but I think that this is really, you should probably be able to ignore most biologists who took the vaccine. I think you can just safely, a lot of what they think is not serious. The most important biology test they ever took in their career, from high school all the way up to grad school or anything like that, they failed it. And that was whether or not they took a transfection. And they didn't know enough about pharmacology. They didn't know enough about mRNA.
Yeah. Very well put.
They failed. They failed that test.
Yeah.
And why should I listen to someone who doesn't think seriously about their own health, their own autonomy, and their own livelihood? And suddenly, should I just read their papers and think uncritically about them? I'm going to be very critical of whatever they put out, because they don't seem to be a serious thinker for their everyday life.
Incredibly well put. This was for, I think, for Rain and I, the trauma was 9/11.
Me too.
There you go, right? And then
I was 12.
Oh, right. Yeah. So, you know, we're not that far apart. We 10 years difference. So we like let it in from that into the Iraq bullshit. And the thing was, like, we noticed that all those newspapers, all these news channels cheerled us into a war that was obviously based on lies. And I can say us because Canadian troops went over too and committed atrocities. And it was all, we knew it was a lie, because by then we're on like Alex Jones and whatreallyhappened.com, and they're already, and there was even mainstream information, sorry, but there's no WMD, that was apparent before any of this debate. And you watch the New York Times and the Washington Post, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, setting up glitzy war rooms, CNN, to sell you, we're going to war, yay! And they fired journalists that asked questions, and we never forgot that. And as you just said, now when they were firing up this pandemic thing, I mean, there's a lot of time in between and a lot of other stuff to trigger us, but
both Rain and I were like, LOL. Yeah, right. Sure. There's a big pandemic coming. You know, because it's just like, you need to convince me now, assholes. I remember what you lied us into. There's like 1 million corpses more in the world,
right?
Because you lied us into the war in Iraq. I'll never forget that. And you want to tell me now, oh, it's a pandemic, and you're only going to have to change and get green and all this stuff. And we're just right away, we're like, fuck you. It was just a joke to me and Rain right away. I see people now on Twitter pulling Scott Adams like, when did you realize the pandemic was a fake? Like 15 minutes after they told us about it. Because of that. And we need, and hopefully this is this generation's moment for a lot of people where they're going to get their blinkers off and maybe continue this into the future. And I do go ahead.
You ever think about why you're getting sick so often? You ever think maybe that's linked to the novel gene therapy that you took that suppresses your immune function? I worked in the pharmaceutical industry. I could tell you about these things and tell you about what normal protocols would be handled to, assess the safety and efficacy of a compound, of a novel prodrug, right? If you're curious. I hear. It's mind-boggling. Maybe they'll get cancer, and maybe they'll be like, I wonder why. Like, well, maybe think about it.
Yeah, because they're going to go and weave their own Iraq WMD story about that too. We're already seeing that sudden adult death syndrome.
It's global warming.
Climate change.
It's climate change.
Climate change is the best. We're like, really? Then off we go. Yeah, climate change and all this stuff. They're just going to weave it and then have a new drug for you, and have a new vaccine for you. We know this. We're speaking to the choir here. But it's just, how do we get the choir bigger? How do we get the choir singing a really nice big gospel chord at the end of the song?
Knowledge doesn't come easy, and that's the problem. Is that people need to read more and read different things and be familiar with different things. And I know it's not easy to become a biologist, but you have to understand, at least from old textbooks, like some very basic things about how this works, and then you can I just know it's not easy to teach people these things. Here's the thing, I taught students at UCLA, which is the best public university on the West Coast or even in America. The most difficult one to get into is for sure for a public university. And not all my students were that bright, It's tough to teach people who don't want to learn or don't have the capacity to learn, right? And even if you have people who really do want to learn, you have to also unbrainwash them to thinking like, oh, science is fact. Scientists only tell truth. I used to think that too, like, oh yeah, we're all following the scientific method, but actually we're all just telling stories. All scientific papers are just stories. And once you realize that, you can be like, okay, be critical of everything then, and if it affects you, if it affects the work that you do, it affects your life, maybe pay attention to it. But if it doesn't, then it's largely ignorable. Like, how many papers do I actually read? Like, you'd be surprised, and maybe I shouldn't be talking about that, but like.
We won't quote you.
Really, most literature is ignorable. Most literature, and that's why most of it's not even cited, really.
Well, you're like abstracts, or like they put out those journals of journals, right, for professionals, where you can just skim through the magazine. This is what's like infected, especially I think the medical establishment was so effective in creating our modern kind of iatrogenic medicine culture that we've got, is that the doctor's like, oh yes, I keep up on all the papers, but they're getting magazines that are paid for by pharmaceutical companies.
Oh, absolutely.
That are giving them quick headlines written by people who are being paid by the pharmaceutical industry. And they're not reading the paper, they're reading the journal of the journal of the journal of the paper. Just a quick rundown by someone with a vested interest. So,
there's no nuance, no explanation of the data. And like, if you read any of these things about how the benefit of the transfections, like, the glossing over of absolute risk versus relative risk, like even something basic like that is how you interpret the result. Like, if you had an outcome, you'd want to see if people got infected or not. If you were going to say that it prevented infections, which they did say that, they glossed over how it actually doesn't do that, right? And they gloss over the safety signals in the studies. They gloss over theirs. They gloss over everything to make you basically not question and just accept things as they are. You can't do that. You actually have to really dig into things. And And this is why I have a really great respect for like Matthew Crawford and Joel Smalley and these guys who are very familiar with numbers that just you can't really fake. You can't fake actuarial data. People die or make insurance claims. These things actually happen, right? Trust these guys because at least they're looking at them. They're looking at the mesoscale information of deaths and actuarial tables, things like that are happening in the real world. Like you can't fake that stuff.
Yeah.
So that's where the
like Denis Rancourt and our good old John Baudouin, like holy crap,
exactly.
like what can you do about that? Like there's no angle, there's no nothing, there's just big bad old numbers.
And those things those things that you can't fake, again, this is the mesoscale, this is the real world. When someone drops dead, you can see that, right? And when they have to report that, because it's a legal issue if they don't report that, whether or not they report the ICD number properly, right? Whether or not they examine the cause of death or things like that, the etiology, that's up to interpretation. But the fact still remains. These events did happen, right? And so the understanding the very general perspective of that, like actuarial tables, death and excess mortalities, things like that can't be faked. That's where your real best approximation of truth is going on right now in terms of adverse events.
But somebody's got to deal with the real world. Like Goopy here is saying, like, what's Doc's thoughts on the insurance companies gonna have to eat claims for 40% more deaths? That's, like you said, mesodata. I mean, like, insurance claims got more deaths. There's really like not much we can say about it.
I'm not quite sure what I should say about that.
That's all right. That's all right. I mean, it's being conversational, but running with your point that there is actual data that will stick.
Okay, we're in 5 years we'll have societal collapse probably. How about that? Like, there's
you went there. You went there. You're not going to get a lot of pushback from us on that. Like the clock's ticking, basically. I mean, this is right now. I push a lot towards goals, like having the space with David Martin. I don't know if you caught that when we had that space with David Martin. So it's a guy that's got his mind's all about suing these assholes and making sure it doesn't happen again. My focus is on that strictly because, like, I got cut off in the intro, but like we joked that that Rain is blackpilled. Rain's up in the Yukon territories on an acreage with chickens and a greenhouse. He's just like, he did this years ago because he's like, society's going to collapse. We can't do anything about it. Fuck it. And I'm like, and I'm like gray pilled where I'm just still like, come on, we can sue them or something, or we can wake the people up maybe, but then I'm like, nah, fuck it, it's all over. So I feel like it's a timer ticking on it, and right now my focus is on action. Can we get people together that can take action? What can we do about this? Because it's our last chance, I feel.
There's hierarchies of action, so you do what you can. In my case, I talk to scientists to try to make them a bit more critical about what they're doing and how they implement things in their lab, and how they, if they're considering transfection, things like that, maybe look at the papers that you've read on transfecting rats for optogenetic channel adopts and think about, do you understand that that's what you might be doing to yourself? Like, and then now you want to talk about how to do that to your entire laboratory of people, or you want to work for somewhere that requires that. Like, maybe think a little bit more about that. Since I have a background in science, I try to talk with scientists about this sort of stuff to make them a bit more critical about what they're doing and how they're acting. And maybe there's a trickle down effect with that.
For sure. I mean, like, Jewish comedians.
And then
can make Jewish jokes. You're right in that scene, so you can talk to that scene. You can talk critically. And you have
I also do this. I'm considering this also outreach so that, like, I can reach the general public and talk with more people about that. There's many people who have a bigger audience than me as well. So, like, I don't need to do this so much, I would think. But yeah.
No, but hey, who knows the path that you'll get on, right? There's just a hunger for this, and there's a hunger to... We're getting it on the record that there are people out there that are highly credentialed, super important in their fields, that are saying 100%... 180 degrees opposite of what the main line is, right?
I'm not that important in my field. I'm basically a nobody. I just happen to swing a good grant, and I published a couple of decent papers.
Well, yeah, I didn't mean you.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
Good. Yeah.
I'm just kidding. No, but I mean, like, you're no one can attack your credentials. Yet you have 180 opposite views of what we've been told over the last 3 years. But no one could possibly attack your credentials or your stature within your field in any way whatsoever. They could have maybe arguments about this data point or that data point, but they can't say, Wes Smith, he's just, like a Trump-loving Nazi or something. Like, your data is your data, and you have, we need so many more like you, and that's what's been encouraging for the gray-pilled like myself on Twitter Spaces, like we were saying earlier, getting many, many credentialed, high-level people, some who even push this crap, are completely 180ing, and it's an encouraging time. So we need more people like you.
I think we need to change the incentive structure of how science is done. Basically, to change how, like, we've gotten here because scientists who were basically using NIH, NIAID funding, and doing international collaborations, and basically also working with pharmaceutical companies, they all have the wrong incentives, right? This is why I stopped believing in science as an institution. Is the scientific method. The scientific method works in principle, but if I wouldn't have to doubt scientists and science so much if we had a functioning society with the right incentives. We'd have a lot less reason to doubt it. But the incentives dictate the behavior according to, like I said, the basal ganglia, the dopaminergic circuitry, and to guide it intelligently. And that's why I mentioned what intelligence is. This is like literally one of the evolutionarily and biologically most natural expressions of adaptive behavior. And we put incentives on the wrong things. So now what people do in science is subservient to the wrong order. Like, now you have people in academics talking about things that don't make sense or things that are maladaptive to society, like lockdowns and transfections, things like that. We have grants for research that probably shouldn't happen because, again, we're supporting the wrong incentives. Like, scientists lost a lot of their bargaining power in the early 90s, late 80s, and Eric Weinstein talks a lot about that. And the actual grant system and the peer review system is also busted and needs to be modified, I think. So there's a lot of issues with how to improve society and how to wake people up. And I think at least waking up the truth seeking, or the truth, the class of people. I don't like to talk about class of people, but the group of people, the scientists who are the truth seekers, or the ones who are trying to ascertain what reality is, their incentive structure has been modified in the wrong way and needs to be course corrected. Then, if that's better, like, we can educate normies better, basically.
Yeah.
But if it's misguided from the top in terms of our incentive structure, like most professors, all they ever do is write grants, right? And one of my most liked tweets is how I said some Duke professor is psyoped, basically, because all these professors want to do is just write grants. So they want to get more money so they can write more papers. Where's the truth in that? Where's the uncovering of hidden mechanisms of reality in that? Like, most science is just wheel spinning at this point, right? No one's really looking into, like, really deep mechanisms of stuff. Most of the science people do is just replicating results from 50 years ago with more modern techniques. Sorry to say it, but that's how I see it.
When you're combining that with a culture of with like the technocracy coming in, with this constant elevation of the expert to the unquestionable, we're getting like an unquestionable class at the top.
That's not science. Yeah.
It's not science. I mean, completely anti-science, but it's very much being touted as the purest form of science to the masses, to where everything is paper, please, papers, please, along with, cite your paper. What are your credentials for you're questioning mask use? Are you a environmental technician or whatever? It's like that. So everything's so boxed in, combined with this kind of like the hallways of academia being turned into the Game of Thrones
silos.
Walk of Shame, where everybody's like throwing vegetables at you if you don't. Wow. What?
And like papers only say one thing. Like, I can come up with 5 papers that I was talking about, the infralimbic prelimbic cortex dichotomy. It's like you can come up with 5 papers that say one thing, 5 papers that say the other thing. It's whether or not you have a cogent worldview and are able to convince people that the mechanism exists and performs the way that you do. And that's what science is. It's just convincing people with a narrative, right? And if you can convince people, then it's an idea that needs testing. And until you have a better idea, that's the idea as it stands, right? And the most fit idea wins, basically. Like, if you have a parsimonious idea of how to explain drug seeking in one aspect of the brain, until a better idea comes along, that's the explanation. It might not be, in many cases, though, it's the popular idea is what wins, right? But the better ideas always, eventually, the truth always comes out. The better ideas always come out. The more parsimonious, more holistic, integrative ideas are generally the better ones.
In the end, the truth does win, man. You got to get like a little bit older before you actually notice that that's true. It feels like it's not most of the time. It's just the time scales. The truth can be held at bay for a long time sometimes. For availability and timing for you, Dr. Smith, are you available to hit the space for a bit for an after show? There's a lot of people in there that'd like to talk to you as well.
Oh boy, I do actually have to get going pretty soon. So
yeah, it's the morning over there, right?
I'm already taking longer than I thought I would take, but like it's fine for one day this week to do that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, the opera's out there. If you wanna pop in there and say hi and take a question there, that's cool.
You guys can talk to me on Twitter. You guys can send me questions on Twitter, and I'll if they're I also occasionally host a space, and I also have a podcast too, the Dangerous Data podcast.
Cool. Yeah, I'm gonna get that. I didn't know you were throwing out a podcast, Wes.
I've had like 10 episodes. Yeah,
excellent. I'll get that. I'll look forward to falling asleep to you talking.
Oh wow,
that's what podcasts are for me.
Okay. I try to keep it entertaining, but I maybe I have a monotone voice that'll help.
No, it doesn't matter if it's entertaining. I put podcasts on so that I go to sleep. If it's really good, then I'll pick it up the next night where I fell asleep, and eventually I'll get through the whole podcast if I love it. But it's one of the only ways that I can zone out and get to sleep. There's a lot of a lot of music notes going on in this head up here.
Do we want to talk about music at all in this brief time that we have left? Or are we just going to stick to the science and stuff?
You said
I have like a couple minutes left.
Yeah. Yeah, music's good. What do you want to do? You want to pull up some tunes?
So the piece that you had to introduce me was actually the Untimely Frost that I performed and wrote back in 2008. And I would love to
like a whole
music,
pro band thing going. You're like the metal neurologist, neuroscientist.
Well, neuroscientist. I call myself the neurologist because it's a unique word the neologism that I came up with, and I also wrote the song called Neologism on that same record.
So you're like neurologism.
Neurology.
Yeah.
It's like thaumaturgy, right? But
yes. So get me to your site, and we'll slap a tune on for a sec.
Yeah.
Sure.
All the music on our intro is our stuff.
Yeah, it's really good. I really like the heavy stuff. You can just go back and play a SoundClick. What was that page? You had it linked up there.
Yeah. SoundClick. And then it was, what was it? Twisted?
Untimely Frost.
Untimely Frost. Untimely is such a metal name. Untimely Frost.
Which is Shakespeare, actually.
Ah, yes.
It's a quote from Shakespeare.
All right, I got it here. Let's go. So when was this tracked?
2008.
Okay,
so I haven't done anything in a while, but.
All right, present and share, and it'll be lovely web mono.
The best sound quality.
That's right. It's how it was intended. Untimely Frost. Think how hard your recording engineer worked on it. We're going to play it in mono 86 kilobyte. Hearing it? And you're on bass? Yes, bass bill.
favorite part.
Cool.
Yes. I love it. Fucking excellent, man. So, and you guys were touring, gigging, working band?
Yeah, we did a lot of gigs. We toured over the Midwest and played with actually a Canadian band too at one point, Into Eternity. It was like an extreme metal band.
Right.
And I was like 20 and I was like, doing all these bass fills and stuff. And their bassist is like, I wish I could be like you. And he's like, a professional musician in an extreme metal band. I'm like, maybe I should actually consider seriously doing this sort of stuff too at that point.
Did you tell him that genetically he couldn't be like you?
I don't think I would ever have the hubris to say that, but I took the compliment and said your band really inspired me, and I hope to play more shows like you guys do, because they were just killing it. Into Eternity killed it at the time. And then when I went out to grad school, Bill Hudson from Celador, who was no longer in Celador at the time, but he was doing this band called Coldera and Defender with Mikey Gremio, also from Celador, and they wanted me to do bass, play like how I was playing there, really fast technical stuff, and I had to turn them down, even though Bill was an acquaintance of mine for several years, when he had been talking back and forth for a while, on doing something. And I guess he trusted me a lot because he knew that I wasn't a drug addict like all the other musicians in LA, and he knew I could actually play a tune and contribute something musically. And but I had to say, I'm doing my PhD now. Like, I have very little time for that. I had more time when I was an undergrad, which is a great thing. But yeah, it was a huge part of my life at that point.
Yeah. Well, you're talking to two guys. Same story here, man. I did the whole '90s working band, 3 albums. Didn't work out, of course. Oh yeah, man.
It's very difficult.
This is where I learned how to do audio engineering and all that stuff. Because we're so old, we recorded the tape.
Oh wow.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I'm a newcomer, and I only ever recorded with the USB and equipment available in the early 2010s, right? Early mid 2000s.
Like an 8 at worst.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, let's call it a night there, Wes. This was great. What I'd like to see you do is a more mind-exploding TED Talk.
Go on.
Yeah, man. You should wrap this
like
up.
An actual TED.
Yeah, something more philosophical like this, where you got a stage and you can open people's brains, or a book.
Yeah, so like I mentioned to you guys, I've written roughly 4,000 words as a sort of an intro on how I think about the world and sort of this mesoscale phenomena and truth-seeking and heuristics for understanding truth and being generals, things like that. So some of it was unpacked here. I still have other bits that I have yet to unpack. And yeah, I'd like to turn it into a book at some point, because I think it's worthwhile to share. I think not a lot of scientists think like this, and most normal people just accept the world for what it is. And if they listen to people that they think are smart, then sometimes those smart people will lead them into the gulags, right? And I would hope for that not to happen to people.
No, well, hey, and we're trusting you here. You dropped a couple names that are perfect examples of how people coming with a high philosophy can reach wide audiences, Peterson and Weinstein. Both Weinsteins.
Both Weinsteins.
Yeah, both of them. But Eric especially. I remember I was in this space. It was one of those big spaces, Nelson and Pega, that does 5, 6, 7,000 people listening. All these doctors arguing over these minutiae, over like what's causing the toxicity in the shots, or the blah blah blah, yelling back and forth. And Weinstein showed up and spoke for like 2 minutes, and then pieced out. He was going to an awards ceremony or something. You can hear him parking his car, and he's like giving everyone like what it's all about, and then pieced out, and then the entire rest of the space was about the foundations of medical science and what we can do to change it. The guy just completely U-turned the entire group from bickering over stupid shit to the core philosophical structures that everybody didn't even realize that they were assuming. So I mean, like, this stuff is powerful. People want to hear it, even if they're too dumb. They still want to hear it, And
I don't think people. I honestly don't think they're dumb people. They're just curious or not curious, and you have to make people. You have to sit people down, and if they're not asking questions, make them maybe show them something that's interesting. That's also possible to make them ask the right question, right? Yeah. Yeah. And there's a lot to be said about Eric. He's a physicist by training, right? And so is Elon Musk, right? Or he wrote a lot of code, and he has a supreme interest in first principles in physics. That's really the only way to truly unpack the world. Is you have to approach things from a physics perspective, because that's what everything is. Like, that's the substrate of everything, right?
That's a good point.
Yeah, and it's not just mechanics, right? It's like chemistry, everything else, magnetism. It derives from principles of physics, right? And there's a point where it's like, yeah, we're hitting the wall on what we understand because of outmoded ways of understanding physics. And I think that's one of the reasons why Weinstein is so interesting, is his idea of geometric unity, which I don't completely understand. No. But I think it's worth pointing out that he is contributing to academic heterodoxy by putting out his own paper on his own time and allowing people to critique it. And he's a very vocal critic of things like string theory, because it should be critiqued, right?
And both he and his brother, though, they're both excellent examples of what happens in academia. The wagons get circled.
They get pushed out.
They get pushed out. Brett, too, as well. Have you? I wanted to quickly ask you all night, because of the mouse thing. I just wanted to quickly ask you if you heard his take on the mouse thing, on the
antagonistic pleiotropy, the hypothesis of I guess aging, senescence, and drug resistance in mice.
Yeah, and that basically the entire population of the mouse thing might be kind of useless, or might be kind of making shit data for the last several decades or so. Like, yeah, so really wild. What do you think of that?
Very general question.
Right. I mean, I'm barely following him.
Absolutely.
But like, it to me, the takeaway is like they fucked up the mice, and so therefore all this basis for studies could have at least a taint to it. Does he have something there?
He absolutely does. That's one of the ideas that not everyone pays attention to this, but that's probably one of the reasons why drug dosing in mice versus humans doesn't necessarily pan out in a one-to-one way. Another issue is that, like I mentioned for my thesis, variability in response to drugs and training of things also matters. So a lot of things get reduced to, like I said, a t-test between two, or an ANOVA between a couple of variables, and you see which plot sticks out the most, and you hide your data. If there's variability in those in response, and you push that out of the way with under the assumption that your treatment is the one thing that causes difference in results, then how do you explain the variability? Like this huge variability in response. If you hide the data, you don't have to explain that. But so one aspect is, mice have been selectively bred for generations to deal with to have a very quick reproductive time. And to an extent, they also have a resistance to toxins. And at the other end of that, on the data analysis side, we don't analyze data to deal with the variability in response. And there's also issues with strains, male, female. There's like so much to unpack there. It's just like, antagonistic pleiotropy and senescence is definitely something to look into, and it's worthwhile.
Yeah,
and then there's also the data analysis side of it.
So that's a great point right there of how someone who's so knowledgeable in that field can go on Joe Rogan, and then I'm sitting there like, what am I gonna watch? And then Brett Weinstein comes up and like, oh, what? Mouse thing? And, 30% of it's completely over my head. And there's a big chunk in the middle that I'm like, okay, sounds like it makes some sense. I got to look into this more. And I got a professional on right now that I can say, is he on to something? And you say,
oh, absolutely.
So
absolutely.
It's
those Weinsteins are yes.
It's a great example of how people working at the highest level can innovate and energize people at lower levels of knowledge to get curious and stay curious and to look for new trails of information that they didn't even know existed.
Absolutely.
That's why we need leaders.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, Wes, I think we'll call it a night.
Yeah, we can go.
Yeah, man. If you do have any time, go ahead and pop into WOG Space and say hi. If you don't, then you don't. You got to go. And we'll see. We're going to see everybody back here. We spoke about John Baudouin. Dr. West speaks with John on a regular basis. We all do. We got John Baudouin back here Friday night to go over the death certificates. This time we're going to look at the fraudulent codes that they put on to make almost everybody die of COVID. Yeah.
Funny how that works.
Isn't it? All right. Thanks so much, Wes.
Thanks, Wes.
Thanks. It was a pleasure.
Talk to you. All right, everyone. Wow. So that was deep. We got our own kind of like Eric Weinstein kind of guy there, making you think about the deeper shit. Holy crap! Yeah. I need a brainwash.
Good.
Yeah. It was a good show. Everybody, so again, we are going to do Friday Night Live as well. This was a little supplemental tonight because we have to fit in Wes due to his it's tomorrow in South Korea schedule. And that means that you need to buy SuperSpreaders merch. It's the only logical conclusion that one can draw from tonight's events. And I don't think that Wes would disagree with us. I mean, look at that. Just look at that. I think I'm going to get that one next.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't go to Cambodia.
yeah, my trucker cap, everyone. I ordered a trucker cap for me. And with the pull-down menu, right above Canada is Cambodia. And that's where my orange trucker hat is right now.
Cambodia.
Never mind that it says Jason. Never mind it says that. Ottawa, Ontario, the 6-digit postal code. Ottawa, Ontario, Cambodia. They just went ahead and shipped it to Cambodia. It's like where we are right now. Everything's just like an AI treadmill, and it just headed off to Cambodia. And at some point, it's like a guy on a bike in Cambodia in the streets, wheeling my hat around, going, "Wait, what? Ottawa?"
Maybe at the end.
Yeah, right there at the end. He's like, "Wait, what? I don't know Ottawa. Where's Ottawa? What the fuck?" So it went all the way to Cambodia. All right, so no merch for me. Rain, you got your merch over there?
I do. I got it all. Yeah.
Yeah, man.
The hoodie. The hoodies are actually not too bad. They're pretty nice.
Yeah, man. Friday, you got to show up. And Mrs. Rain. Throw her on in the hoodie.
In the hoodie. There we go. Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, so everyone go over and hit WogPog Reel. Anybody that's got the cancer that's known as Twitter, head over to Twitter and check out Spaces. This is cool stuff. It's like the fun old days of like Art Bell Radio. You can listen in, and then when you're ready to talk, you can put your hand up, and the host brings you on. It's really cool. And there's an after show going on for this there right now. Totally worth checking out.
Yep.
All right, everyone.
Coming out, everybody. Appreciate to see you.
8 o'clock Friday, we'll be here with John Baudouin for the devastating, more on the Massachusetts death certificates, all-cause mortality, and the fraudulent use of the ICD codes to attribute death to the big old C. We stayed on YouTube, so I'm going to call it the big C.
Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Have a great night. Continue to spread it.